So, as you all know, I'm really bad at keeping to a schedule. Um, it would be ideal if I did these weekly and I uploaded to my Etsy shop weekly, but we all know that's not going to happen. So, this is an additional example to how bad I am at keeping on schedule, because this was supposed to be a shorter video than the last one, and it's ended up being a lot longer. Now, originally I also wanted to show off a piece that I did of Jesse and James from Pokemon, but literally just after I finished recording my outro, I realized that the whole file was corrupted. I thought I could salvage it, but I can't. So, I will show like I'll show like the Procreate speed paint, because Procreate's pretty cool. It actually like auto records the time lapse of your drawing. So I will include like a little time lapse of that at the start. But then I'll show like the actual full painting. It will be a watercolor painting because I believe that's the only one that I have at this current moment that I haven't shown off yet. Yeah, okay, cool. Just looking at my projects, that's the only one that I have that I haven't shown off yet, which kind of sucks because I'm not actually a big fan of the piece itself. I called it Unicorn General. I just had some weird inspiration. There's nothing really to it. I just don't like it, but I need to show something. So I guess, next week my project is do more paintings. Work out why your camera corrupted. So that'll be my task for next week. Excuse me. That kind of sucks. I really wanted to show Jesse and James off. So when I say in my outro, like, oh yeah, keep an eye out for this print in my shop, it's not a print of the watercolor painting, it's a print of Jesse and James. So keep that in mind, because that will be in my shop soon, as well as my Psyduck and my Mew print. And while I have you here, I'll show you this other cool new thing that I've been making. They're stuck. I've been making pins. Oh, move my camera, sorry. This one is a love disc print. Oh, my lights. Hello. It's love disc. And there's earrings of this one as well. I plan on doing like Pride ones. So if you want to support my shop and help me get more supplies, then I'll start making Pride love discs. Because love discs are one of my favorite Pokemon. They're so cute, and I'm really sad that I missed out on the Valentine's Day Pokemon Go event. Because I don't have one yet. But the other one that I've started making is, I have a bunch, but I also have this Mr. Sparkle one, and I also have Mr. Sparkle and earrings as well. So those will be in my shop soon, as well as the all the Pokemon prints that I've been doing. I'm also running a giveaway on my shop at the moment. That's for Pokemon portraits. So a portrait of you and your favorite Pokemon, or your trainer and your favorite Pokemon, that sort of thing. So feel free to go and join that. I'll link it in the description if you want. But getting into the meat of what this video is about, today I delved down a very deep rabbit hole again, as I always do. But I didn't want to cut anything out because I felt like if I just made it about like two of the two long stories, then it just wouldn't be enough. So I've included a bunch of like smaller stories. And they build up to the one big story. So, without further ado, I'll get into the art. Sorry that it corrupted. I wish I could save it, but I can't. But anyway, have fun with the HMS Terror and the HMS Erebus. So, I just want to start off by saying these aren't in any particular order. I don't really know what order I'd put them in, but I'm going to try and put like the shorter ones, like the less exciting ones at the start, and then work my way up to the, the bigger and the better, and you know how that is. I'd also like to apologize for the recording quality, because for some reason I think my camera like crapped its pants. So the file's slightly corrupted. It's a little bit jumpy, and it's already it was already going super fast before I even put it in the program and in the program. But either way, it's not great. It might stop and start a little bit, but I'm working with what I can. Anyway, we're starting off with the Wasp, which was a privateering ship made to sink British vessels during the War of 1812. Privateering, if you don't know, is basically the fancy word for pirates. So the Wasp was basically a pirate ship that was hired by the British during 1812, and it vanished in the Atlantic Ocean in 1814. A Swedish ship crossed paths with them in the middle of the open ocean, and they were reportedly heading for the Caribbean. The ship and its nearly 200 crew were never seen again. So, short and simple, but still kind of weird. The next will be the SS Cotopaxi. This is quite an interesting one because, a little bit of trivia, the SS Cotopaxi was actually mentioned and sort of featured in the 70s film Close Encounters of the Third Kind. It was referenced to as being taken by aliens, because if you haven't figured it out, that movie is about aliens and the Bermuda Triangle. So, quite an interesting tidbit, but we'll find that the SS Cotopaxi doesn't actually have a lot to do with Bermuda. So, the SS Cotopaxi was an emergency design for the United States Shipping Board during the World War I emergency shipbuilding program. So that was basically when the war started, and they just needed to get as many ships, tanks, planes out as fast as they physically could. So that's what the SS Cotopaxi falls under. It launched in November 1918, went to Boston in December that year, and was fraught with accidents. It ran aground at some point, and had to dump hundreds of liters of oil in order to get out of that sticky situation. And it ran into a tugboat at some point and sank the tugboat. So already not a great start to living your best ship life, I guess. On November 29, 1925, after being recommissioned as a transport vessel, the Cotopaxi was on its way to Havana, Cuba, when it radioed in a distress call saying that they were taking on water during a tropical storm. The ship was officially listed as missing and overdue on December 31st of that year, and all 32 crew were presumed dead. The wreck was found 65 kilometers off the coast of Florida in the 1980s, but after 15 years of investigation, it was finally identified as the missing Cotopaxi. The Cotopaxi was one of 17 ships designed in that fashion and built in the same shipyard. Several of the sister ships went missing at some point. The Coshata went missing on a trip from Virginia to Boston in January 1927. The Cover Run went missing southwest of Bermuda in February 1941, and several others sunk due to wartime action and natural disaster. Now, considering Cotopaxi is the one referenced in Close Encounters to the Third Kind, it's kind of interesting that they wouldn't actually talk about the Cover Run instead that went missing in Bermuda and has slightly more slightly more to do with it. But it's still an interesting story nonetheless. Obviously, kind of disappointingly, they got to the bottom of what happened. It was sunk during a storm. But at the time, I can imagine it would have been a huge mystery, because this ship was full of coal, and it just vanished off the face of the earth. Another one that I will mention, this is an honorary mention, but it's more a folk tale than a real story. But I cannot remember the name of it. Let me Google it real fast. Orang Medan, that's it. The Orang Medan was a ship that actually has a game based on it now, called Man of Medan. So the Orang Medan was apparently a wartime ship that radioed in quite a disturbing distress call, and when other ships went out to assist it, all they found were dead bodies and dead animals and just this really grisly scene. But all of the faces of the people who had died had this absolutely fear-stricken look about them. And obviously the last person who had died was the radio operator. And as the ship was being towed back into port, it exploded. So obviously there's not a lot of evidence that it exists, and it does remain a piece of folklore more than anything. But it is quite an interesting story nonetheless, because if it was real and it was lesser folklore and more true, then we'd have a much bigger mystery on our hands, which is why it remains an honorary mention, because it's a story of a ship that apparently was smuggling something, because it wasn't on normal ship lanes. So yeah, honorary mention. Orang Medan is pretty cool. If people want more on it, I might do another episode on just Orang Medan, or like fictional ones. But anyway, continuing on. Next on our lineup is a steamer ship called Chimo. I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but it worked in the northern Canadian Arctic transporting furs. It got stuck in the ice during an Arctic winter where it was completely frozen over in October of 1931. Now, the crew didn't want to abandon this absolutely priceless payload and built a large structure of wood next to the ship to camp on until the ice started to break and they could continue on their journey. One morning, they all woke up to find that the ship was entirely just gone. It vanished. They thought it sunk, but local Inuit swore that they saw it just drifting off. And it continued drifting until its last sighting in Alaska in 1969, where it was known as the ghost ship of the Arctic. The only question that I have about this one, I actually thought about this for a really long time afterwards. It was kind of sad why this was bothering me so much, but my friends can attest to it. But if they knew it was out there and it was full of so many priceless furs, why didn't they just go after it? Like, they knew it was there. They knew where it was. Just go get it. If the furs are worth that much, you can pay for the rescue effort. Just go get it. But anyway, that's not the focus of this episode of today's video. It's not supposed to be me just yelling about that. Anyway, moving on. The next is one of my favourites, aside from the last one. That's why I'm leaving it second to last. Is the tale story, The Fate of the SS Waratah. Is a steamer ship built in 1908 for the Blue Anchor Line Trading Company between Europe and Australia. The ship was supposed to be a luxury improvement to earlier steamers and could hold well over 700 people, and could be refitted for frozen cargo and ores from Australia when it returned to Europe. It served semi-uneventfully for just over a year, like, it just served normally, but after bringing an extradited convict back to Durban, South Africa, one passenger disembarked early, saying that he was uncomfortable with the ship's behaviour and was disturbed by visions he was having of a man. The visions he was having of a man, and this is a quote from him, a man dressed in a very peculiar dress, which I had never seen before, with a long sword in his right hand, which he seemed to be holding between us, and in the other hand he was holding a rag covered in blood. Unquote. Ultimately, his decision to embark early probably saved his life. Really. The Waratah left Durban at 8 p.m. July 26, And at 4 a.m. July 27, another steamer was overtaken by the faster Waratah, where the crews exchanged info and carried on as per normal. It's a normal trend, normal practice that when ships pass each other on the water, they'll use their light signals to tell each other who they are, where they're going, and if they have any problems. It's just like a common courtesy. I don't know if it's a law or not. Probably. I'm not a ship person. I shouldn't be talking about this, but I do know that that's what happens. Is that when ships pass each other. Hey, can you birds shush out there? But Australia, the land of the noisy birds. But I do know that's what happens. Later that day, so July 27th, a Cape mounted rifleman, so like a South African rifleman, spotted a steamer matching the description of the Waratah struggling against waves before vanishing. The rifleman reported this to his superiors, but nothing more was done. At 5:30 on the 27th, so in like the later evening, a ship saw steamer smoke and steamer lights on the horizon. Enough smoke that he was concerned by fire. Suddenly, there were 2 large flashes of light and all sign of the ship was gone. The crew waved it off as scrub fires on the ocean banks in the sand dunes, and didn't even record the incident and only brought it up later when the Waratah was announced missing. Then again, at 9:30 p.m, another ship heading north to Durban, while the Waratah was heading out of Durban, passed a steamer and exchanged info in the normal fashion through their flashing lights. But due to poor visibility at the time, they were unable to identify the steamer aside from the final letters TAH. Now, Waratah ends in TAH, so here this is referencing that maybe this was the final sighting of the Waratah before it was gone. The Waratah was due in Cape Town on July 29th and was never seen again. Now, a fun fact that I really like about this one, just kind of, it's not really that big of a deal, but its very final trek as it left Australia to Durban was from my home port of Port Adelaide. And I don't know, I just think that's really neat. There's all these photos of it in Port Adelaide just before it left, and I'm just, hey, I live there. Well, I mean, I don't live here right now. I'm not going to tell you where I don't live in Port Adelaide right now, but it's cool that that's my home port, you know? It's cool having a funky mystery living with me. And now we'll get onto the last and final one of the story of the HMS Terror and the HMS Erebus, and their quite tragic, disturbing fate. So, as always, if you've made it to the end, if you've made it this far, you guys are legends. And I'm just gonna sink, get it? I'm going to sink straight into the story of Sir John Franklin and his expedition into the Canadian Arctic. I got a lot of my research for this one specifically from a bunch of history articles, and there's actually a YouTube documentary that I will link in the description about how they actually found HMS Erebus, which is actually it took me about 3 hours to get through it because I was taking notes, obviously, but it is a good, fun hour to spend, you know? There's a lot of information in there and a lot of just good stuff. It's just good stuff. But anyway, I'll get straight into it. Now, in 1845, British explorer Sir John Franklin took 2 ships into an area of the Canadian Arctic known as the Northwest Passage. Now, at the time, people had explored the east side of it and the west side of it, but they hadn't actually explored in the middle because it was way too frozen, you know, and this upset the British because you know what the British are like. They have to have everything. They wanted to explore and map that area in the middle, that sort of grey area on the map, and claim it as British territory. Because this area was also thought to be a shortcut to the East Asias. But in the end, 128 people vanished, along with two heavily fortified ships. Everyone chosen for this huge auspicious journey was well versed in traversing the Canadian Arctic. John Franklin himself was one of the first Arctic navigators in general, and had gone on two previous expeditions to map the North American coastline. So, he knew what he was doing, and during one of his first trips, he affectionately, in quotation marks, became known as the man who ate his own boots when they ran out of food. So, as we can safely assume, they were much better prepared for this next one. The ships HMS Terror and HMS Erebus were specifically adapted ex-warships, specifically adapted to cater for this journey and help the crews remain and stay better prepared for being frozen into the ice, having to stay in these freezing cold temperatures for months at a time. And it's pretty, for 1845, what they managed to shove into these ships is pretty impressive. The hulls were reinforced with oak planks up to 8 feet thick and covered with iron plates. They did this as like an early form of an icebreaker. The ship had a coal-powered steam propulsion engine and a retractable rotor, as well as central heating. So for the 1840s, you'd expect they'd have some of these things, but to be able to jam them all onto a transportable ship in this amount of time, it's pretty impressive. I thought it was impressive anyway. The ship was stocked with 3 years of food, as well as a library, and musical instruments to pass the time. So the last time these ships were ever seen together, or just generally at all, was in July of 1845 in Baffin Bay, west of Greenland. Since then, hundreds of searchers have gone looking for the ships, but they mostly come up empty-handed, except for a few small clues as to the fate of these ships. After the ships were gone for 2 years, Lady Jane Franklin, John's wife, pressured authorities to go searching for the missing ships, and in 1850, British and American forces joined at the opening of the pass to start their search for the ships. This is where they found the first of their sort of grim clues as to what happened. They found 3 graves dated to Franklin's first winter in the ice, so 1846, so only 6 months after leaving Britain. For such a well-prepared ship, this immediately set up red flags for the searchers. Even for a not that well-prepared ship, having 3 deaths after 6 months on one trek was weird. One grave was marked with the Bible quote, "Thus saith the Lord of hosts, consider upon your ways." Not consider upon your ways. It's, "Thus saith the Lord of hosts, consider your ways." I simply read my own notes wrong. The bodies were later exhumed in 1984 in an attempt to determine their cause of death. Now, the research team in 1984 is exactly how you'd expect them to be. Not Indiana Jones, but all sporting matching mullets, white t-shirts, blue jeans, and snow boots. I thought it was iconic. They were definitely going for a look and achieving it. It was a bit of a surprise, though, I will say, to see a bunch of mulleted men wearing t-shirts in the Arctic digging up these bodies. But anyway, the bodies were terrifyingly well preserved since they were buried like in the frozen ice. And all of them had a suspiciously high concentration of lead in their system. Now, considering the time period, this wasn't uncommon, and it could have been from a multitude of different factors, both on and off the ship, but it wasn't the official cause of death. Now, in 1859, 400 miles south of these graves, just off the coast of a place called King William Island, another clue was found in the form of a handwritten note encased in a small stone structure. It is considered to be one of the most vital and important clues to the fate of Franklin's ships. And the note explains that this is where they travelled after their first winter in the Arctic, and the location of, like, this is where they were stuck for their second winter. The message simply ends with the message, all well. But, scrawled around the edge of the first note was a second note that was written a whole year later, so it was dated a whole year later. These notes said that along with 9 officers and 15 crewmates, 15 sailors, Sir John Franklin, leader of the expedition, was dead. The note continues to say that the ice had remained frozen through the entire summer of 1847 and the ships weren't going anywhere. Recently taken ice core samples show that the vessel's journey coincided with a period of about 30 years of especially freezing summer conditions. And this time period was said to be the single most freezing period of time in the last 700 years. So, it was just their luck that they picked to go right now. And it ultimately ended up being the worst possible time in the last 700 years they could have possibly gone. From this point in their journey, the new captain, unsure of what else he could do, ordered the surviving crew members to march south in hopes of making it back to North America and a British trading post that was like on the north coast of Canada. The note doesn't explain why he made this decision or if the captain actually believed in it. But according to the oral history of local Inuits, the Franklin survivors were spotted several times on their journey south. One story says that a pair of Inuit were approached by some of Franklin's men, and the Inuits gave them some seal meat, but being well aware that there was no way that they could provide for so many of them, they ended up leaving, or having to leave. Another group of Inuits described a particularly grisly scene. This one is a little bit gnarly. They discovered the bodies of around 30 people. Some of them were in tents, and some of them were in makeshift shelters made from the lifeboats that they had in tow with them for carrying supplies. Many of the corpses were in a state of, like, heavy mutilation, and pots and pans and kettles and stuff that were strewn around this campsite gave evidence that some of these poor survivors had ended up resorting to cannibalism. This was all detailed in a letter written to the London Times, by the way, and it sent the population that read it absolutely just bonkers, because, you know, to them, these men were meant to be the heroes that discovered the Canadian Arctic, and they weren't meant to be eating each other. They did not want to believe it, and so they were dismissed. These accounts by the Inuit, despite how reliable they are and how reliable we know they are now, they were completely dismissed due to the uproar that it caused. Until in 1992, a huge sort of stockpile of bones were discovered on the coastline of King William Island, not far from where Erebus and Terror were abandoned. The cloth and buttons found with the bones proved that they were part of Franklin's crew. When observed closer, some of these bones had clearly identifiable cut marks made in them by man-made weapons or blades. Basically proving the Inuit account correct, or at least giving it a lot more credibility. These bones that they found basically just put, I forgot what the saying is. Put the last nail in the coffin for the cannibalism theory. But through their complete dismissal of Inuit oral tradition and just basically their word in general, the British also dismissed Inuit accounts of what happened to the two ships Franklin's men left behind on the King William Island coast. One of the ships was crushed by the ice before sinking in the same place it was first stuck in their second winter. The other ship apparently stayed intact and drifted through the Arctic before sinking in a location that Inuits called the boat place, because it just sat there for so long before it ended up sinking. As of 2014, HMS Erebus, the flagship of the expedition, was found and identified as the ship in the Inuits' boat place. Due to the distance between where the Terror was abandoned and where the Erebus was found, theories have struck up about how the Erebus ended up so far away, and it was like 100 miles away. It was pretty far away. While ice in the area is known to drift south in that direction, it doesn't explain how the Erebus managed to weave its way into a little pocket between several smaller islands. And if you are catching my drift, get it? Oh man, I'm so full of puns. If you catch my drift and see where I'm going, another detail left out by the dismissal of the Inuits was that smoke was rising from the Erebus when it was last seen afloat, and this leads scientists to now believe that at least some of the crew stayed behind and navigated the ship into this position. The Terror was eventually found in 2016, almost perfectly intact, sunk exactly where it was, and the last ever known account of activity from any man, crew member, ship, or anything were 3 sets of boot prints leaving the Erebus, never to be seen again. And with that, we have reached the end, finally. We do have to say thanks to all the brave explorers of the unknown world from those times, because, they did do something terrifying, and I think the saddest part of the Terror and Erebus story is that if it was true and the Erebus ended up sailing to where its last location was with people on it, they basically would have finished their task, because where the ship ended up had already been explored by people. They completely covered the northwest corridor. And obviously they weren't thinking about that, but we can give them the credit that they deserve. And with that, I will say thank you and I will say goodbye. And hopefully, fingers crossed, I'll actually stick to my word and make this video slightly longer. Not longer, shorter, slightly shorter. Oh my god, I don't want to make them longer. But anyway, thank you for sticking with me on this one. I had a lot of fun doing the research. Despite how tired I am, I had fun. So, if you also found this super interesting and super enjoyable and liked my dumb little drawing of Team Rocket, I thought Meowth turned out really cute. Make sure to leave a like, make sure to comment your favourite stories about missing ships or just anything. I think I'm going to be covering Missing 411 in the future because that's one of my favourites as well. But keep your eye out for this print in my shop because it will be coming up soon, and I'll show it off in my next video as well. And yeah, with that, I'll see you in the next video.